World of Warfare presents the second Schweinfurt raid. On October 14th of 1943, a day that would later be named Black Thursday, a green flare was fired from the control tower at RAF Podington Air Base in southeastern England, signaling wheels up for 21 B-17 Flying Fortresses of the 8th Air Force 92nd Bomb Group. In the lead aircraft, Mission Commander Captain Bud Peasley and pilot Captain James McLoughlin took off into a driving rainstorm, prompting Peasley to order McLoughlin to climb above the cloud layer to rendezvous with the rest of the fortresses, presently lifting off from 16 8th Air Force bases across eastern England. Breaking free of the clouds at 8,000 feet, Peasley and McLoughlin found themselves all alone as the weather made it difficult for pilots and navigators to find each other. Hours would pass before the bomb groups finally found each other and assembled. But when they did, formations of 291 American heavy bombers began their flight toward Germany in loose and vulnerable combat boxes. The second Schweinfurt raid represented the 115th combat mission for the mighty 8th, who, together with the RAF, had been bombing Germany around the clock for the past 4 months, the Americans by day, the RAF by night, with a directive to destroy German aircraft production plants to ensure air supremacy over Europe in advance of the D-Day landings planned for Normandy, France. The first raid against Schweinfurt on August 17th had cost the B-17 fleet dearly, including 90 aircraft in the week leading up to today's mission, which involved the destruction of ball bearing plants at Schweinfurt, a vital component found in most weapons of mechanized warfare. Delivering the knockout blow was 291 B-17s of the 1st and 3rd Bombardment Divisions, while 60 B-24 Liberators from the 2nd Bombardment Division were assigned to fly a diversionary decoy mission. Used in 40% of all German aircraft, transports, and tanks, Allied war leaders estimated that the destruction of Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants would cripple the enemy's war production for upwards of 6 months to come. To emphasize the importance of the day's mission, 8th Air Force Bomber Commander Brigadier General Fred Anderson distributed a letter to each aircrew before takeoff, writing that this operation today is the most important yet conducted in this war. The target must be destroyed. It is of vital importance to the enemy. Your friends and comrades that have been lost and that will be lost today are depending on you. Their sacrifice must not be in vain. Among the bomber stream is the Bloody 100th, who had already lost 27 of its original 35 crews so far in the war, leaving just 8 remaining bombers on a path toward Schweinfurt. Bloody 100th Staff Sergeant James Harris had been on the first Schweinfurt raid, later recalling his briefing when the route map was uncovered earlier in the morning. "When I saw that damn red line led to Schweinfurt, you could have heard a pin drop." Most of us secretly thought that this would be a one-way trip. Over the English Channel, the bomber stream was joined by squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts, known to bomber crews as their little friends. 44 Thunderbolts of the 353rd Fighter Group were assigned escort duty for the 1st Bombardment Division, while another 48 were assigned to the 3rd Division. Their mission was to escort the bomber stream to the limits of their fuel range before turning back for home, leaving the bombers to fly the remaining 370 miles into Germany without the benefit of fighter cover. To make matters worse, the delay in meeting up had caused 64 bombers to return to their air bases before leading elements of the stream reached the Dutch coastline. 50 minutes before the bomber stream entered the airspace over continental Europe, German air controllers alerted the Luftwaffe thanks to their early warning radar and radio listening posts in occupied Holland, giving the Nazis enough time to scramble Bf-109s and Fw-190 fighters from airfields across the Low Countries and Germany, along with rocket-equipped Bf-110s and Me-410 twin-engine heavy fighters. As Germany's war effort began to crumble under the Allies' persistent strategic bombing campaigns, by the time of the Schweinfurt mission, 65% of the Luftwaffe's fighter strength was engaged in the defense of the Reich, forcing Germany to reduce its fighter strength on the Eastern Front and in Italy. Each German fighter pilot took to the skies that day with Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring's recent decree authorizing the court-martial of any pilot who returned to base without combat damage or the successful shoot-down of an American bomber. As the bomber stream crossed over Walcheren Island, 20 Bf-109s and FW-190s bounced the heavies, despite the fact that their Thunderbolt escorts were still flying high overhead. Dropping in on the enemy from 31,000 feet, the P-47s immediately gained the upper hand in the high-altitude dogfight against uncoordinated attacks by the Germans, which allowed American fighter pilots to drive the enemy from the air. 10 German fighters were shot down, with 5 more badly damaged, at a cost of only 1 Thunderbolt. Reaching their maximum fuel limit, the Thunderbolt pilots broke off their escort with heavy hearts, knowing their big friends would be sitting ducks over German airspace. In the early afternoon of October 14th, over 100 German fighters attacked head-on against the strung-out bomber stream of the 1st Bombardment Division. Tightening up their combat boxes to increase their combined firepower against the German threat, 4 rocket-equipped Bf-110s attacked the load box of 16 fortresses of the 305th Bomb Group, closing to 1,000 feet before unleashing their rockets, still well out of range of American tail gunners. All 16 rockets flew through the middle of the lower box, devastating the formation when their preset fuses detonated their payload. After a good number of fortresses exploded in mid-air, the surviving combat box broke up in panic, making them vulnerable to further German attacks. In response, German 109s and FW-190s made repeated head-on attacks, aiming their fire at bomber cockpits, where B-17s lacked sufficient forward-facing guns to defend themselves. Staff Sergeant Philip Taylor of the 91st Bomb Group watched helplessly from his waist gun position as a fortress off his left wing was shot down, only to be replaced by another. In a matter of minutes, the replacement fortress also took multiple hits and spiraled out of control. A third took its place before catching fire after a German strafing run, forcing the pilot and co-pilot to hold the bomber steady while the crew bailed out. Taylor recalled years after the war that the co-pilot looked up and saw me watching. He made no attempt to leave the ship or save himself. Instead, he waved at me. I waved back until she blew up a couple of 100 yards out. That co-pilot, knowing he was about to die, did one of the coolest gestures I've ever seen. By the time the 1st Bombardment Division approached the IP, or initial point, at the outskirts of Schweinfurt, it had already lost 56 bombers, either blown from the sky or too badly damaged to continue the fight. One of the lead formations, the 40th Combat Wing, was down to 16 fortresses after leaving England with 37, while the leading 305th Bomb Group had just 4 of its original 16 B-17s remaining, leaving just 224 heavy bombers to press the attack on Schweinfurt. Flying through a carpet of anti-aircraft fire, the lead fortresses of the 305th Bomb Group, flown by Major Charles Norman, handed over the control of his plane to Bombardier Lieutenant Joe Pellegrini, just as their formation was being shot to shreds by enemy fighters, prompting Norman to propose to his flight team that they should break off their bomb run to form up with a neighboring combat box, thereby affording them more covering fire against the enemy. With the target now in sight, Pellegrini demanded that he finish his job, saying, "Major, please let me continue this run. Visibility is perfect, we can't miss." When Norman insisted that he could no longer hold his bomber over the target, Pellegrini dropped the ship's 1,000-pound bombs in a Hail Mary dump that missed their intended target. In fact, none of the leading 305th's remaining fortresses dropped their payloads on target, while only 3 would make it back to England. At 14:38 hours, the 1st Bombardment Division unloaded their bombs on an industrial sector of Schweinfurt, only to hit civilian neighborhoods instead. Despite friendly fire flak that was heavy and accurate, German fighter pilots made near-suicidal attacks on the fortresses during their bomb run, while farther back in the stream, Lieutenant Ray Bullock flew his B-17 named Sundown Sal on their 25th and final combat mission. 6 minutes out from the target, Bullock's ship was struck by a 20mm cannon shell that set a fuel tank on fire in his left wing, prompting Bullock to calmly order his men to bail out before completing his bomb run alone. Knowing the plane could explode at any second, his crew refused to leave, deciding as a group to stay with their leader all the way to the target. Immediately after bombs away, all 10 crew members parachuted to the relative safety of a German prisoner of war camp, where they would sit out the remainder of the war. Following their bomb run, the 1st Bombardment Division turned south before sweeping to the north toward the coast of France, just as the 3rd Bombardment Division reached the IP, which proved to be far more accurate than the splintered runs of the first wave of bombers. By 14:56 hours, the last of the American bombers completed their runs, leaving Greater Schweinfurt in flames. Aboard the lead plane, Colonel Peasley told his nerve-rattled crew, "We've flown this far for Uncle Sam. From here, we fly for us." With all American heavy bombers now on their return leg, BF-110s and Ju-88 night fighters attacked the bomber stream with more rockets, as the Luftwaffe flew a staggering 833 sorties by the end of the day. Lieutenant Bill Burdick's B-17 of the 96 Bomb Group was bounced by 4 BF-109s, the first attacking head-on from the 12 o'clock high position, but failed to veer off and collided with Burdick's stabilizer, forcing the B-17 to fall out of formation. A second BF-109 was shot down by the navigator while attempting a second head-on attack, while a third suffered a direct hit from the starboard waist gunner, which exploded the fighter mid-air with a shot to its fuel tank. The final fighter broke off his attack just as the battered fortress slipped into a flat spin. With 2 engines shot out, Burdick struggled to regain control as his B-17 plunged from 23,000 feet to 5,000 in a matter of minutes, at last managing to level out at 1,800 feet when Burdick turned on the autopilot in an attempt to arrest his spin. Against all odds, the crew nursed the wounded fortress all the way back to base. Mercifully, the same dense cloud cover that plagued the start of the mission returned as the bomber stream flew over the English Channel, ending any further German attacks. Joined by 2 squadrons of Spitfires over the Channel, tail gunner Eugene Carson at last had a moment to reflect on his survival. Years later, he recalled slumping over his gun compartment in sheer exhaustion. "I began to shake and cry uncontrollably." After the bombers had returned to their assigned air bases, ground crews, known as ground pounders, were shocked at the shot-up conditions of their planes, while ambulance crews offloaded a stream of wounded men to nearby hospitals. Up to this point in history, the Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt proved to be the largest air battle in aviation history, witnessing 321 American fighters and bombers against 300 German fighter aircraft in a battle that extended over 800 miles. 77 B-17s were shot down, 45 from the 1st Bombardment Division alone, while 121 were damaged, 17 so badly that they had to be scrapped. The 305th Bomb Group suffered the worst due to its lead position, losing 87% of its fortresses at a loss of 130 men killed or wounded. Of the original 351 bombers to take to the skies on the morning of October 14th, just 33 landed without any damage. Altogether, 590 American airmen lost their lives to combat, while an additional 65 were made Kriegies or prisoners of war. Miraculously, all 8 heavies of the Bloody 100th survived the battle without any fatalities to crew. However, 22% of the American bomber force in England had suffered unsustainable destruction at a loss of only 38 German fighters. As for the raid itself, a disappointing 88 out of 1,222 bombs dropped directly impacted the ball bearing plants at Schweinfurt, halting production for just 6 weeks instead of an estimated 6 months, while the German Minister of Armaments Albert Speer concluded that only 10% of each factory's vital machinery had been destroyed in the air raid. Yet the month of October alone saw losses to the Luftwaffe of 20% of its total fighter force on the Western Front, losses that at this stage of the war were becoming increasingly difficult to replace, a clear indication that the Nazis were slowly but surely being ground down in a war of attrition. The cost of the Schweinfurt raid was subsequently hidden from the American public, with Army Air Force's commanding General Hap Arnold proclaiming that the opposition isn't nearly what it was, and we are wearing them down. Yet privately, he and General Dwight D. Eisenhower acknowledged that a shift in their strategic bombing campaign was desperately needed. In response, the leadership of the 8th Air Force was overhauled by the appointment of Brigadier General Jimmy Doolittle as its new commander. Once in office, Doolittle rebuilt his bomber force while fitting his fighters with drop tanks, thereby increasing their range before the introduction of the king of the jungle, the P-51 Mustang. Yet the changes came too late for many of the young men who took to the skies in the first few months of the combined bomber offensive between British and American airmen, wherein just a quarter of the 8th Air Force bomber crews completed their missions during the entirety of 1943, making the second raid on Schweinfurt the highest loss rate mission of the Second World War.